It's another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. But before we get into it, are you subscribed? If not, please make sure to subscribe, like and share the video and spread the word. Because the Christian Reeve podcast is here to stay. I love doing this and I love all of you that support me. So thank you. And yeah, let's get into this podcast, shall we? Boom! Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is the CEO and founder of Statuscake. It's described as one of the world's leading website uptime monitoring solutions companies. Welcome to the show, James Barnes. How are you doing?
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me on the show. Yep, good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Thank you for agreeing to do this. I know obviously being a business owner, you're obviously very busy and try for time, so it's tricky to find time for stuff like this, but I do appreciate it sincerely, so thank you. Let's jump straight into Statuscake. Tell us a little bit about what Statuscake actually offers businesses and how it came to be.
Yeah, sure. So we've been around quite a while now, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. So
Close to 10 years now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, exactly. So we founded the business in 2012, 2013. So yeah, we're an uptime monitoring service, as you said. And I guess in a nutshell, what we do is we alert our customers when their website goes down and then give them the data to establish what went wrong. Why did their site go down in the first place? So I guess the question you'll ask is, why is that important to a website owner?
Right.
I guess three things really. It's reputation, rankings, and revenue. So if someone comes to your website and it's down, instantly, that's not good for your reputation. It's so easy in an online world to click away to someone else. So it's your reputation lost, it's the lost sale. And it takes so much time to get into Google and rank to be found in the first place, but Google doesn't like sites that are down. So it can impact that as well. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. And it sounds so easy in practice. And that was one of the things that really appealed to me in the first place about building this business. It was, for the first time in my life, a job or a business I could describe to my parents and they got it. But yeah, as the years have gone on, obviously it's got more complex and so on and so forth. But the concept remains, pretty simple.
So I've got a couple of questions springing out of that, and this always happens when I have interviews with guests. I sort of ad lib on the fly. But given that I've got some experience actually working in marketing in the field, I do actually have some experience with technical side of things, with website monitoring and that. And I came across certain websites such as Hotjar, I think the company was called, and other systems like that. So for those who don't know, basically Hotjar is a system which allows you to sort of record user sessions in real time. So anytime someone is clicking on your website and going around on the website, it shows you sort of how they're using the website, how they're interacting with the website, and which particular areas they're focusing on, and so on and so forth. So how does your company relate to that? Is it similar? Is it very different? Do you have your own system? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I love Hotjar. I think they are a great business. And actually one that I admire just in terms of how they run as much as their software. But so Hotjar really is about understanding when a visitor comes to your website, how they interact with the site. So as you said, you can watch videos of how the customer interacts. You can look to see where they're having trouble. So are they trying to click something that looks like a button and isn't? It's all about helping people convert from a visitor to the website to a paying customer, or whatever your measure of success is. We're all about, though, from our point of view, is helping the business owner ensure that their site is up in the first place. Mm-hmm. So we're that stage before, if you like. Hotjar is about analyzing how they interact with your website. We're all about making sure your website is up in the first place.
Okay.
So but it's not just about downtime. I'm a keen runner, and the London Marathon ballot results came out the other week, and everyone's clicking to get on there. And there were two issues. One, the site was down at certain points, but other times it just took a long time to load. And it's that customer experience that's just pretty dreadful, isn't it? Where you get to a site and it takes time and time and time. And it's how much you care about the brand that dictates how long you hang around before you click away elsewhere.
You know, it's funny. I had a guest on the show recently, and we were talking about how technology changes over time, and I sort of it reminded me of what the websites and the internet were like, sort of in the mid 2000s. You know, when I was growing up with the internet as a teenager. I've kind of forgotten over time like how slow websites used to be, and there are certain videos on YouTube where people have done like sort of social experiments to see like, can you live in that time using that technology? So there was one guy who did this where he kind of set up I think like Windows XP or something like that, like in basically technology that would be appropriate for around, let's say, 2005, and straight away, the very first thing he said, which was an issue, was just the fact that it took so long for anything to load. And I'd forgotten about this completely, but it's true. Like back then, it took probably a good 5 or 10 minutes just for a full website to load, even if it was a really powerful website like I don't know, let's say like MySpace back in the day, or Facebook or something like that. It actually took a long time. And there were, this is a really weird hack, but a lot of the time, if you wanted to test, like, if it was your internet or if there was another problem, you could go on a website such as the BBC website, and that would always sort of load like that very quickly. And obviously, if it didn't load very quickly, there's a problem with your internet, right? But it always kind of blew my mind how there were certain websites that would always load very quickly, but everything else just took forever. Now, my point with this is that obviously over the years, you know, internet has just got faster. You know, we went from 3G to 4G. Now we've got 5G internet. And now I believe there's this kind of expectation in the market as far as, you know, anyone that's using the internet these days for websites to load within, let's say, 10 to 20 seconds. You know, if it's anything less than that.
10 to 20 seconds and they're gone. I mean, even at 2 seconds, for every half a second, the percentage drop off is huge. And there's calculators online where you can see if you're to speed up your load by half a second, how much it actually impacts the bottom line. I mean, I think the other thing we'll take for granted is that, you know, within the UK, you know, speed is pretty good. Although in saying that, I live in the countryside and, you know, my internet's like dial-up sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Half of your listeners won't know what dial-up is, but, you know, I'm showing my age a bit. But, you know, we have customers throughout the world. So, you know, our big markets are the US, UK, Europe. But, you know, we've got a lot of customers in South America, Asia, into Africa, where speed is pretty slow. So you need to find ways of making sure that your site loads quickly wherever your customers are. And whatever device they're on, you know, so Google now, you know, is really keen on sites loading quickly on mobiles. You know, if you cannot get your site load quickly on a mobile, Google won't rank you as highly. So I think you're right. I think we've got used to sites loading quickly and we expect it. But I think one of the things that has slightly changed is that because we've gone for speed, so instead of all of the assets being on our website now, we palm them off elsewhere. So they're stored in repositories, if you like, so they load quicker. But what that's meant is that we now have these different points of failure. So your website might be up, but if you're pulling in a payment gateway or maybe a font style, or you're pulling your images in, if that goes down elsewhere, your website is still impacted. So I think, as with all of these things, the issues today are the issues of yesterday, but they just have a slightly different feel to them, different tint.
One of the things that really interested me about this when I started learning about it was that, like, even little things like how can I put this? Like, so if you take like images as an example, like I worked for a corporate company a couple of years ago where I was doing various different projects for them. And one of the things they asked me to do off the get-go, as far as it pertained to this like content audit that I was doing, was to actually basically take all the images that were on the website and put them through some sort of other website where it would like decrease the size or compress the size of the image files so that they would load faster. And to me, you know, that seemed like a very basic thing to do, but it's amazing like how much time that would actually save. And, you know, like, just in general, this idea of optimizing everything on your website so that it's much better for just general usability, I suppose. And the whole, thing of like UX and UI is probably like such a big part of business these days. And, it always has been an important factor, but it seems like it's like probably the most important factor these days.
Yeah, I think it depends on the stage you are in your business as well.
Right.
Certainly it's become more established. The early days, it's all about the hustle. It's all about going out, getting those first customers and trying to keep going before you run out of money or energy. And, I think that's the biggest challenge for any business out there. But once you become established, your customers change as well. They're no longer the early adopters that are, to be brutally honest, very forgiving and love you all the same. So the established corporates who, they expect something to work. They expect it to work in a particular way. And, particularly in our early days, I know that the way we built stuff was quirky. It didn't behave in the way that perhaps it should. And our early customers love it because in a way they're used to how it works. But we know that as we go on, we need to start behaving and having our site behave in a way that new customers who've never known us before expect it to work. I think you're right. I think it is incredibly important, UI and UX. It's just back to, there's so many other services out there. Why would you use a service that's difficult to use when there's a perfectly good one down the road that does the same thing, is probably priced relatively the same, but doesn't make you think too hard?
And that's the thing, like when you were talking about that with regards to like early adopters and some people staying around, I was like, well, maybe if they like really, really believe in the brand, but I think the vast majority of people, myself included, if you don't get what you want from the product within the first couple of tries, like you said, you just move on to the next thing, and you don't even feel like a sense of like loyalty as such, unless you're like really passionate about the brand for some reason. But like a lot of the time, you can just find another alternative, and there's going to be many, many, many alternatives. But I suppose maybe another factor to this that's kind of acting as the opposite end of this is the fact that, some brands are more trustworthy than others. And, like generally speaking, you want to go with brands you've at least heard of in a positive light. You know what I mean? It's very scary to kind of steer away from the major brands and maybe go for an alternative that no one's heard of. If it's, if you're using it for something that's a big part of your business, maybe like, for example, payment gateway, something like that. Like you want to have, maximum security with that so that you don't kind of mismanage people's details, their financials and stuff. But, I mean, for something like that, if I was a business owner, I would probably just take the hit, pay the money for the more expensive options, just so I could secure that, as opposed to taking a risk and going for a cheaper option just because it's, there's an alternative. I don't know. I think some things you can take risks on and some things you can't.
I think you're right. And actually for me, funnily enough, the word trust, it's incredibly important. It's actually one of my themes for this year. We sort of try and have a couple of themes each year of, I suppose, things that we think are important. I think trust now to the consumer, and whether you're in, the B2C space or whether you're in B2B, at the end of the day, you're still selling to a person.
Yeah.
And trust is incredibly important. And as you said, whether it's, that trust is really difficult to build. It takes a long time, but very easy to lose. And, I know that's a bit of a cliche, but it's, it holds true.
Yeah.
So, I think everything you can do as a business now, from the point at which you acquire them, so even down to the ads that you show, don't start using ads that, fly fast with the copy. When you get into your sales site, make sure that everything on there is clear, it's not misleading. Make sure the sign-up process, that you're instilling trust, safety, security right from the start, because otherwise you're not going to get them past that first 30 minutes of their life with you.
The way I look at it is that, like, and I remember I heard this many years ago, and I think it especially rings true now, is that, the consumer has the power now. No longer does the business owners have the power. It's always the consumer that has the power. And what I mean by that is that, you know, we've got the internet now, and the internet is a resource, if nothing else. So it gives you information, it gives you the ability to, you know, make decent comparisons between different businesses and different options and such. And moreover, it gives you the ability to be more well informed. So, you know, if you are looking at potential options, either on a B2C or B2B level, you know, you're going to be looking at this and saying, this just doesn't meet up to my standards. And it's like many years ago, when we were in the market where, you know, customers just didn't know, you could easily steer them towards your product and potentially, you know, manipulate them if you wanted to do that, you know, whereas you just can't do that these days. Like the vast majority of people just know. And like, obviously with other things like, you know, the popularity of things like coding and development and software knowledge. I mean, even myself, you know, I don't ever claim to be, you know, really well knowledge on computers, but I do have a very, I would say, a solid knowledge of like how to do certain things. And I've kind of realized that, like, to some extent it's a generational thing. I think like my generation and the generation underneath me as well have kind of grown up with a level of experience with the internet that, you know, previous generations just simply don't have. And, you know, that's not to say that older generations don't, you know, use the internet. I mean, you run a business that literally is involved within this. So it's there's not like a complete cut off there. But like, what I'm trying to say is that, like, people in my generation and the younger generation just know how things work. And to give it a better example to illustrate what I mean, like when I was learning IT at school, it was unbelievably basic. And I can tell you, none of the stuff that I used back then, I have used ever in my life. Right. But like the systems that were in place back then and the systems that are in place now, you know, like everything is much easier to use. It's much more understandable. You know, I would argue that user interfaces in general are just much better. So, you know, if you do want to sort of get involved with computers or run a business that is predominantly online, it's far easier to do so than it was in the past.
You're right. There's so many resources out there. Customers do like to understand the product better. It's far easier now to spend 5-10 minutes looking at 8 or 9 products and evaluating them, even at a technical level. But I think one of the things you touched upon before, I don't think it's enough now to just look at the product and compare one to the other. People want to know more about the business and what it stands for.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we all know from a retail perspective, there are certain brands that we can relate to. And I think it's the same and starting to be the same in the, you know, the B2B space as well. Customers now want to understand, you know, it's not about maximizing shareholder return anymore. I don't think it's even about this, you know, people talk about stakeholders now instead, don't they? But people want to know about your whole supply chain. They want to know, what impact does your supply chain have on the environment? How does it impact the people that work in your supply chain? And big corporates, if you're dealing with big corporates, they certainly want to understand that, because they all have big policies where they will require you know, any of their suppliers to confirm that they, you know, meet all of these certain criteria and policies. But at an individual level, I think people just want to see that now. They want to buy from companies they relate to.
See, it's interesting that you say this, because I feel like there are two sort of key audiences with regards to this. And what I mean by that is that, like, yeah, I do see the same sorts of conversations, the same discussions on websites like LinkedIn and Twitter, where people are very, you know, conscientious of dealing with businesses and buying from businesses that, you know, offer organic products or are ethically focused or have, you know, really strong CSR or whatever the case may be, right? But then, you know, then I look at other companies like Primark as an example. And I remember when I was at business school, this was right around the time that, you know, Primark was under investigation by Paranorma. If you remember the investigation, I'll just quickly cover it for our listeners. So back in the mid-2000s, Primark basically was stitched up by Paranorma for having like unethical business practices, because they were operating, I believe, a factory in Bangladesh or somewhere like that. And they just weren't treating the workers right. And as we all know, like many of these companies who operate this business model where they're creating stuff very cheaply and selling it very cheaply tend not to have good business practices, that they're not ethically concerned. Now, they got exposed and they immediately changed their approach. And if you go on the website, even now, there'll be like a tab there that says ethical trading and blah blah blah. So they did make an effort to change things. But the reason I bring this up is that around that time, you'd expect, oh, well, no one's going to shop with them. No one's going to do business with them now. On the contrary, their sales skyrocketed after that. And it makes me think like, yeah, a lot of people are making, having these conversations and talking about being ethically focused and, only buying from businesses that promote these kind of ideals. But at the same time, you got a wider majority who don't care and will shop with them anyway. And that's where
I suppose there's a couple of things, isn't it? I think firstly, you as a business can decide whether or not you want to wait until you are forced to by a regulator make changes, or you can decide that you want to be ahead of the game. And, I think a lot of businesses feel that they don't want to be ahead of the game and want to wait for the regulator because, as you said with Primark, their margins are so small. Well, that to me suggests that their business model is wrong. If I'm being honest, it's not. Put it this way, it's not sustainable. These businesses either have to change their model or they have to decide that if they get ahead of the game, that it will actually improve their sales. I am a strong believer that, if you are on the right side of this, that actually it actually makes sense financially as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a point there with regards to, businesses kind of only decided to take action when they get caught, which sounds really shady, but so many businesses do this. It's actually kind of mind-blowing. For instance, if you take like newspapers in the UK, many of them will print a story when they know they shouldn't, because they have already figured out how many copies of papers they're going to sell, how much money they're going to make through ad revenue on their websites. And then when they do eventually get sued, they just quickly pay off the lawsuit, get it done, over, you move on. And, there's different ways you can look at that. I think for many of those businesses, they kind of look at it like, well, we'll just put this in our losses and this will probably help us to kind of achieve more profit in that year, or avoid taxes or whatever. I think there's kind of like management with regards to that, as far as like it's planned, like they know what they're doing and they'll continue to do that as long as it works and they don't get caught.
Well, look, I guess, and I'll be very careful what I say, but when you think about the big disruptors out there, their business model is about looking at a market, being pretty careful about not falling on the wrong side of the law, but certainly looking at areas where regulation hasn't kept up and moving into that market aggressively. And they know that at some point, the more successful they are, they will get regulated out of business. But in the meantime, particularly for those early investors and the VCs that come in and so on and so forth, they are in and out of that business before the regulator is caught up. And you can look at it with, likes of Uber, Airbnb. I think it's fair to say in time that those businesses will go from high growth businesses, because they've had free reign to pretty much do what they want, to actually pretty commoditized utility businesses where the growth is no longer there anymore and they are just churning over healthy cash flow. But the big growth will have gone. Now that could be 5-10 years down the line, but that's the model. It's get in there, disrupt before anyone notices.
Absolutely. Let's bring it back to Statuscake. So one thing I want to know is that, apparently you managed to sort of fund the business without any angel investment. Now, this is really impressive because most businesses tend to have, several rounds of investments from angels, from, maybe from bank loans, from various other sources. And that can always be a bit of an issue sort of further down the line. It's not an issue in the beginning, because you've got that cash flow in your business and you can kind of set things up. But as we've seen time and time again, it can be an issue because of the equity stakes that they have in the business. How did you pull this off?
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting, and uh, I actually think. Well, we'll come back to that, but
Okay.
I think it was. I still think it was the right thing to do. And actually, the more you read now about particularly SaaS businesses and how they should be funded, I'm seeing more and more people, including VCs, saying that actually they don't think you should go for investment. That bootstrapping is the way forward. I think there's a couple of things, and I sort of come back to what I said earlier about being successful in business is making sure you don't run out of energy or money. And bootstrapping really, I think, lends itself to a couple of things that help with that. Certainly helps the money, maybe not the energy.
For our listeners, could you just explain a little bit about what bootstrapping is?
Yeah, so bootstrapping effectively is starting a business with the shirt on your back, the few coins in the piggy bank or a credit card or whatever. Not that I'm suggesting that's right for everyone, but effectively starting with the money you have and trying to build up the business out of your own personal money and hoping that you get quickly enough to the point where your costs are being covered and then you're able to take some money out, and to the point where whatever your success point is, you've got a salary, and then you can start thinking about how you grow the team from there. Um, I like bootstrap businesses because I think they are built in sustainable ways. So one of the things about raising VC money is you're thrown a shed load of money, you're told to spend it in a year, and at the end of that year, you've not got any money left. So
Mm.
if you haven't found a way of applying that money to get a quick return on the VC's investment, you're out of business. And once you get that first round of money, you are on this constant merry-go-round of raising and raising and raising. And for me, that would detract you from what you're trying to do. As an entrepreneur, you are there to build a product, to find customers, and to bring them all together. You're not there to keep going and raising money. And for me, it's a big distraction. Um, and one other thing, I think this is important, because we started with very little money, the approach we took to solving the problem, I think, was very different to how a VC funded startup would have approached it. If you've got £1 million sitting in the bank, your immediate thought probably is throw it on AWS, do whatever is quickest and easiest to get us up and running. And I don't think that always leads to the best solution. And there's quite a few really interesting books out there, and I can't remember their titles, so apologies for that. But just looking at this concept of starting with a little amount of money and the kind of outcomes that you get and how more creative they tend to be. And I think there's something really quite interesting in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So some of your major clients have included brands such as Calm, Ticketmaster, Aldi, and Lidl. What's it like working with these major brands, and what exactly do you provide them with as far as your services are concerned?
Sure. I mean, so as I said, we've been going 10 years plus. So over that time, we've probably helped around 140,000 customers of all
Oh,
shapes
wow.
and sizes. So we do have the bigger blue chips. So some you've just talked about, governments and so on.
Mhm.
It's a real mixture, though, of what they need from us. Predominantly, we are self-service. So the customer comes in, they set
Ah,
up the test that they want. A lot of the time they will use the data they're given to go away and solve themselves, but of course we are there to help as well. So we'll have some customers that we don't hear from 1 week to the next, and others, that there is, more hand holding. But broadly speaking, their needs are pretty much the same. It is back to that same question: is my website up? How long is it taking to load? And various other things that we're helping them with.
many businesses right now that are offering online services tend to have like tier systems. So they have like, let's say like a beginners, maybe a free trial version, then starter, medium, premium, etc. What's your kind of setup as it pertains to the services that you are offering?
Yeah, so sure. So actually, I mean, our business model has evolved over time, as you'd expect. We started off with a freemium model.
Right.
So, if you were a free customer, you could sign up, and we threw pretty much everything at you and said, get on with it. If you would like some of our premium features that maybe test your website a little bit quicker and so on, then you pay for it. And it was really successful about in terms of just growing that customer base. That's what you want to be doing really early on, is just opening the gates as far as possible and getting them in. As we've matured, we've thought about, right, okay, do we give as much away on our free tier? And you'll see it with a lot of companies like us, because there's a real cost to servicing a free customer. Even on a tech platform, in terms of resource, in terms of support, and so on. And it's really difficult. And I think we found the right balance in terms of continuing to support our free customers. And it's something I feel passionately about. One of the reasons why we started the company was we wanted people to be able to have monitoring regardless of who they were. So we've got some customers we've had for 8-9 years who are on the free plan, and they always will be. And I'm not going to boot them off the platform. They are an important part of our community, and they provide some of the best feedback, and they become great advocates. You know, they share the love for Statuscake. They'll tell other people about us who may come and buy.
So that's where the return is. Maybe it's not always with monetary value, but right there, that reputation management and just testimony, stuff like that is so important. Probably even more valuable than just, you know, receiving money from regular clients.
Oh, God, completely. I mean, word of mouth referral, you know, has always been and will be one of the most powerful forms of marketing. It really will. So we you know, we've got the freemium plan. We have a huge percentage of our customer base which is free, and then we have, as you say, the starter plan, and so on and so forth. You know, the basic premise is, you know, the more you eat, the more you pay. But you know, we are transparent with our pricing. I think that's one of the important things that you were talking about earlier, is about transparency. People want to understand the moment they come to your site how much it's going to cost you. They don't want there to be any hidden costs. You know, the Ryanair model, as clever as it is, you know, you go in there looking for your £2.99 flight, and by the time you've got on board, it's cost you £200. You know, customers don't like that. You know, I personally will go to a website, and if there's not pricing on the page and you have to email for pricing, I'm not interested, because in my mind, perhaps rightly or wrongly, I'm just thinking that they're looking at my profile, trying to put their finger in the air to guess how much I'm willing to pay.
Yeah, that transparency thing as well, like, or lack thereof, I've seen that in so many different areas, not just business. Like, for instance, with job hunting, like I've been job hunting for about a year now, and I look at so many profiles, job descriptions that don't contain how much you're supposed to earn. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm a businessman and I always have been. And I look at, like, well, you know, my time is my time and my skills are my two main assets, right? So if I'm trading these to you, I want to know how much I'm getting in return, and over you know, the course of, say, a year per annum. And like, one thing that really helped me to shape this was when I started doing freelancing a couple of years ago. It really started to make me understand, you know, the value of your time and your skills, and how that changes over time. And, you know, because you start thinking like, oh, I don't know, and you sort of undersell yourself. And I had the same thing. I was always like, oh, I can't charge that, that's too much. But then after a while, you're like, no, I know how long this takes. This is where my skill level is at, and it's always increasing. Therefore, I need to charge more. So when I see these job adverts where they're just not giving you any kind of indication, I just feel like it's like, well, why should I waste my time, you know? And I feel that it's the same with business too. It's just like,
I think as well, it probably reflects on, for me as well, if I came to a job description like that, where the salary wasn't on there, and, you know, there isn't that transparency, I think it talks about the wider business. So if they're not transparent there, how are they going to act in everything else? And, you know, it's back to what we were talking about earlier with trust. You know, I think if you get it wrong in one place of your business, it flows over. There's no stopping it. You can't put it in this watertight compartment and hope that it doesn't sort of spill over into another area of your business. There's just no excuse for lack of transparency and trust. I tell you a business I love in terms of, I think just in, you know, we talked about businesses that we think get it right. Brewdog do transparency brilliant. They publish their P&L, including everyone's salary, and share it with everyone. I think that's amazing. You know, to have that, I I don't know, I suppose it's confidence really, isn't it? Just to go, actually, we're not afraid of anything. Here it all is. And I imagine also that in terms of staff trust, and so on, there's no room for ambiguity. There's no one sitting there thinking, am I paid fairly or anything like that. I think it's brilliant. And I think the more that businesses can move towards that full transparency, the better.
Like, one of the things I've learned over the past year, because I've discovered some really good YouTubers that have experience in this area and they're now freelancing, but they give you tips on, like, how you should negotiate your prices in interviews and stuff like that. And, it's a thing that kind of blew my mind years ago, because I would always kind of approach job interviews like, oh, I really need this job and I'll do anything to get it and blah, blah, blah. And then obviously you start working in your field, you start realizing your potential, and then you start approaching it differently and you start actually negotiating. And that, I feel, is a lot of the time what they're trying to do with those adverts where they don't give you a price, or if sometimes they will actually say like, oh, negotiations and blah blah blah. And that's kind of what you have to do. You have to go in there with confidence and say, this is what I want. And the same is true of business as well. I found this many times that you can actually haggle. Like, people think like, oh no, the price, you can't move the price. No. The price is there. It's set as a kind of like, this is what we're going to do. But if you come with a better deal, a better, like if I came to you and I said, okay, this is what you're offering, what about if we move it a little bit down to like this price and we do this? Potentially there could be negotiation, because, it's B2B, it's business, and that's what you do in business. You try to find the value in the deal and what works for both parties. And I think it's really important to have that mentality in general. A lot of people don't have that mentality. They just go, okay, I'll take the price. And then they realize maybe a year in, I could have done better, and, I could have got more, or, maybe this isn't exactly what I had envisioned, and, so on. It's a tricky.
Yeah, completely. I mean, for us, particularly with our bigger customers, I call them enterprise light. I think enterprise is such a misleading term, but in terms of some of our customers that are sort of on plans that are, not off the peg, absolutely, we will sit down with them and we'll work out exactly what they need. And, we will agree on a price where, one thing I'll always say is there needs to be enough margin for us. I don't want to do a deal where we are not making much money, because the temptation then is to, you want to have the right motivators from the start for both parties. You absolutely do.
I think that's fair as well. As long as you say like, hey, this doesn't work for us because, we're just not going to make any money on it. I don't think there's anything unreasonable saying that. You're just being brutally honest and saying it's just bad business.
Absolutely. And I remember very early on with Statuscake, in the first 2 or 3 years, when big businesses were first starting to talk to us, and they're going, I'm really worried that your prices aren't high enough, because I want you guys to be making good margins, because I want you to be around in 2 or 3 years' time. People don't mind paying if they think what you're asking is a fair price. One thing I wanted to touch upon, though, back to, I'm jumping around now, but back to the salaries on job descriptions. I think you talked about, having the confidence to haggle and just say I'm worth this. I think one of the things that concerns me sometimes with those, though, that not everyone does, and I think it's been shown in job descriptions that don't have salaries, it disproportionately impacts women. Women are less likely, a lot of the studies show, to actually push for more money. And my concern is that actually it's an indirect form of discrimination by, effectively, hoping that you're gonna, get someone that is good for a job and pay them the least possible. It's.
Well, I think the key thing, above all else that you touched on, which I totally agree with, is this idea that, you can't kind of undersell yourself for several reasons, but one of them being, and you touched on it with those bigger companies, is that if you do that, if you set your bar too low, then companies and individuals will look at it and go, well, they must not be that good then. You know what I mean? Like, I started doing that with my copywriting services. I set it really low because I thought, oh, this will be good. It will attract attention because it's lower prices. No, it does the opposite. People look at that and go, oh, no, the quality can't be there then. You need to charge higher so that people can kind of look at it and go, okay, this guy must be the real deal, or this girl must be the real deal, and they'll run.
When we first started out, we had a plan that was around £5 a month, because we wanted to start a plan, and like you, we kind of thought we need a lower entry point. And we sat down one day, it just didn't feel right. And we found that we were getting the most queries and the most support was being pushed towards those customers. And I don't know whether it was because they needed more hand holding or whatever. And we got rid of it. And we were really concerned that, geez, what's going to happen having got rid of that? But actually, having got rid of it, and the next stage up being around, I think it was £15 at a time, our conversion rate shot up. It's back to that point, as you said, that if the price is too low, are people going to worry about the quality of the product they're getting?
And like what we were saying again, just as a final point on this, like that transparency as far as pricing is concerned is very important. Like, for example, if you want to say, okay, let's say the market average is like 25 for like the starter entry and you charge 20 and you say, well, you know, we're undercutting the competitors because we want to be the lowest competitor. We want to offer the most, you know, reasonable price. But you say that, then everyone's going to be like, okay, great. But if you just undercut everyone and then don't say anything, it's going to be like, well, they're the cheaper option. Why should I go with them? You know,
do you know what? I hate that C word, cheap. I absolutely hate it. And you know what? You know, people used to go to me, do you compete on price? And go, no, never, ever, ever compete on price, because you end up in a one-way, that's a one-way street. And, you know,
because the bigger businesses will just undercut you until you got a business. As simple as that.
Yeah, and, you know, actually, when you look as well about the motivators for people buying, a big one is trust, coming back to that again. But actually, price is pretty low in terms of the things that people take into account when they buy. So don't make it your primary reason for them, you know, to buy from you.
Absolutely. Moving it forward, like, how do you think your work is likely to develop in the next 5 to 10 years? Now, the reason I asked this is obviously, you know, one of the questions I was going to ask you before, but I think you already kind of covered was, you know, how has you know, website analytics and website monitoring changed over, let's say, the last 10 years. And it's pretty clear it's become one of the most important things that businesses need to sort of take advantage of if they're going to really maximize all of their marketing exploits, all of their potential sales exploits, and generally just having a good website overall. But where do you sort of, based on the current research that you're doing right now, everything that you're collecting right now, where do you think we're heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
Look, I'll talk about our business to start with. You know, I think when you work in tech, it's really easy to think that it's all about Silicon Valley, it's all about machine learning, artificial intelligence. It just isn't. It really isn't. Bearing in mind that even in countries like the US and the UK, a huge percentage of businesses still haven't gone online. Now, COVID has changed that a bit, and I think there's no doubt about that. I mean, COVID has been it's been it's been a disruptor to huge amounts of businesses. Some have been forced to go online and have adapted very well. It's definitely sped up that digital transformation. And that's going to continue for the next 5-10 years. I think the latest stats that I looked at, and it is sort of a couple of years ago, it was something like 30 to 40% of businesses in the UK still didn't have a website. So it's not that we are already at maturity. And in the US, the figure's even higher. It's around 50 to 60%. So the idea that the UK and the US are mature markets in terms of being online is just not true. And actually, really interestingly, this time last year, just as COVID was starting, I was on a briefing about the travel industry. And we all think of the travel industry as being, you know, hugely online. You know, we've got Expedia, Booking.com, all of them, you name it. But actually, 90% of all travel destinations in the world aren't on any platform at all, still. Now, you know, to me, that just shows you how much growth there still is left in that. So my view is it's more of the same. And at Statuscake, you know, we are supporting those earlier businesses. We do support businesses that have huge engineering teams and, you know, microservices and, you know, invest a lot in that. But our bread and butter, I think, for the next decade is going to be those small business owners at the lower end of the market. We are selling, you know, Ford Cortinas rather than Ferraris. And I've shown my age again.
A good way of putting it. Let's move it forward. So prior to your work in Statuscake, you actually were working in the legal field. And you work for companies such as the BBC as a legal and business affairs executive. I guess the main thing I want to kind of know from your time working in the legal field is, what were the main kind of takeaways that you learned from working in that field? Is there anything maybe that you use to this day? Like, and also, like, why did you decide to sort of come out of that and then start a business in a completely different field? Like, talk us through that journey.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I've had quite a varied career, I guess, along the way. So I've worked in legal. I worked at the BBC for a long time. I scheduled children's TV for a while I was
Oh,
there.
wow.
So I've done plenty of stuff. I guess what I really liked about the legal stuff, and I think it's still incredibly important, is the problem-solving mindset. So looking at something, trying to understand what needs to happen and how you can solve it. And I know everyone thinks of lawyers as being red tape, costly, and so on. But actually, I've met in my time some very good lawyers who do cut through the problems, and that's what business is all about. It is about being able to look at anything, being able to quickly understand it, and understand what happens next. But I guess I liked the deal making as well. I enjoyed the negotiation. That was a big part of my life. I used to deal a lot with record companies and so on. It was a lot of fun. But why did I start Statuscake? I guess it was because I decided I wanted to start doing it for myself. And I think that's why a lot of people get to where I got to, where you learn a lot along the way, you absorb a lot. I was working in online gaming just before I started my first business. And it was 2005, roughly, just when the company I worked for, Party Gaming, IPO'd. And, I got involved with all aspects of the business, from marketing, affiliates. It was a big online business. And I decided that actually I was getting frustrated with how the business was working and what it was doing, and wanted to try and do my own thing and do it in a perfect way. I think everyone starts out going, I'm going to run my business differently. It's all going to be perfect. And within 6 months, you realize that actually it never is perfect, but you make it as good as you can.
I totally agree with you. It's one of the reasons why I'm not really in a rush to go back in corporate. Like, I think if anything, I'm probably just going to stay self-employed for the foreseeable future. And the reason for that is because, I've worked for a lot of different companies, and I think, you take away the good and the bad equally. Do you know what I mean? And I'm very thankful for the opportunities I've had. But at the same time, I had many frustrations when it came to bringing in ideas, wanting to achieve certain things. And it's one thing if you get told, okay, we're just not going to do this, we're not going to go with this. But it's another thing when you start working on certain projects and then suddenly it just gets cut, either because of a funding issue or because a new manager comes in and says, no, we're not doing it that way, we're going to do this. And it's that constant kind of like hitting the wall and going, well, how am I going to put my ideas into fruition? And then a lot of the time, the only way you can do that is by setting up your own business.
I think you're right. Particularly in large organizations, you're right. I think it's very difficult sometimes to see the result of the work that you're doing. It gets lost in the bigger picture. I think there can be opportunities. I mean, one of the reasons I loved the BBC so much when I was there is that so many of my colleagues had this attitude of, it's not my job. I'd go, well, I'll do that then. And, I'd end up doing all sorts of exciting things that no one else wanted to do. But I think that's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
But I think that's why also within Statuscake, and I hope we get this right, I do try and make sure that everyone within their role can see how it directly impacts on the wider business goals. And that's important. At the end of the day, we are all a team. We are all pulling in the same direction. And I think as long as people can see the direct results of what they are doing on a day-to-day basis, you keep staff happy, you keep them motivated, and hopefully they don't want to leave and run their own business.
Absolutely. What would you say are the biggest lessons you've learned in the business world?
Gosh, good question. I think it is, I come back to it at the start, it's energy. I think it's about having the energy to keep going. So, I talked earlier about it will take you a while to hit your success point. So it's having the energy to get to that first success point, but you'll get there, and then the next challenge will come. So, you know, one of the things I think you need to think about before you start your own business is, do you have the stomach for this for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And, you know, burnout is quite high in startups because you throw yourself into it in the very early days because you have to. There's probably you and a co-founder. Your team grows, but your time pressures don't, because the set of tasks you have just evolve. So it's pretty relentless, but, you know, you've got to enjoy it. You just have to. And that's probably the big takeaway. You have to enjoy it. There's no, look, you know, it's like any job. There's no point doing it if you don't enjoy it. Go and do something that you find fulfilling and rewarding.
I remember when I first got into marketing, you know, it was after, you know, I'd studied the degree and I obviously got into the field. And in the very beginning, I was like, this is great. I can't believe I get paid to do this, considering the fact that, you know, I used to work crazy 60-hour weeks in hotels and supermarkets and everything. And then once the kind of, I got, you know, a year in, 2 years in, I started to realize, okay, I don't live for this. I thought I like marketing. I like learning about it. I love learning in general. That's, you know, one of the biggest things about me as a person. But I have this real desire and need to be creative, to create my own things. And, you know, if you look at what I do in general, podcasting, acting, music, it's all creative endeavors. And I don't like this idea of being confined to one space, to one thing. And that's where I found that I was getting a little bit frustrated with just working for a company, is that, you know, that's kind of the reality. But it depends, because we've all got different kind of goals, different things we want to achieve. Like if I see someone in a career person and they've got particular goals they want to achieve in that industry, it's like, fair enough. If you're happy in that, if you're actually happy, not telling yourself you're happy, if you're actually happy, that's all that matters. You know, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. It's, am I happy doing this? Do I wake up in the morning and get excited about this? And that was the thing that I realized when I started to come to the end of, you know, my time in corporate, was that I just didn't have that same passion that I had in the beginning. And I wasn't investing as much time in it. And the thing is, I work very hard, sometimes on the point of, like, you know, being a workaholic, and I have to actually force myself to take breaks. But when I was in that particular industry, you know, there were times when I just wasn't as productive. I wasn't as interested in it. And I was frustrated at, you know, maybe not getting a promotion, or maybe not getting a particular project in, or you know, there was different frustrations. And I realized at the end of the day, it all comes within the context of what you can control and what you can do. And when I started, you know, when I returned to doing this creative stuff a couple of years ago, and I realized I'm actually willing to put loads of time into this, and I enjoy the process. Like, for example, podcasts, right? After this is done, I'll spend ages editing this, uploading this to different places, doing all of this stuff that you don't see, but I'll do it and I'll be happy doing it. And I never get frustrated with it. I never feel like, oh, this is too long. Oh, this, oh, that. But I did feel that way about marketing and the other careers I'd had in different industries. And I think that's the key. You've got it, like you said in the beginning, just there, like when you were talking, like, it's all about loving what you do and thinking to yourself, like, am I willing to do this? Am I prepared to put the time and the investment in? And obviously it's so important if you're setting up a business, because in those first couple of years, when you're trying to, you know, get the startup out of the 2-year situation where, you know, you come out of that, where most businesses fails in the first 2 years. That's why I said that. But when you're coming out of that, and then you've broken past the break-even point, and you're actually starting to make profit, and you never take your foot off the gas pedal. But that initial period is where you put, like, essentially like your soul into it. You're putting everything into it to make it work. And if you're not willing to do that, and you're not committed to do that, then you just shouldn't do it. Simple as.
No, I agree. And I mean, look, we've talked about businesses, but actually a business can be the individual. I mean,
Yes.
You freelance, right? Your business is you. And you know, look, I think like never before, there's real opportunity to freelance and have a portfolio, if you like, of clients and different things. And creativity is important. I mean, I think even within business, creativity is important. And I don't think there's enough work done on really understanding within business how creativity flows. And there's been quite a few really interesting studies about actually bringing creatives into business to help with problem solving. So, we've not done this yet, but say you've got a dev team trying to work out how to deploy a piece of software. Why not bring in a creative who doesn't understand the software, but makes them think differently and talk differently to each other? It's back to my idea of just trying to get different results and different ideas out of people. Stop trying to think in a standard way.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I remember working for one company where the marketing and the sales team were completely separate. And a lot of companies are like this. Some are together, some are apart. Mostly at the moment, marketing and sales wings are just focused purely on the analytics and nothing else, which I totally disagree with. I think the analytics are important. Don't get me wrong. They're very important. And you definitely need them. But to not be paying attention to creative at all is a major mistake as well. But more importantly, you need to be interacting with the different teams in your company in different departments. Like I remember when I started just going off on my own intuition and just kind of talking to salespeople, I learned so much from them. And I, as you said, like a totally different way of approaching it. And I was so thankful that I'd actually spoken to those people and just reached out. And I was like, why hasn't anyone done this before? I don't understand this. And it's like, that's what it's about. It's about reaching out and learning from other teams. And as you say, putting some sort of fresh blood into a department that, might be all kind of focused and kind of steering the ship in one specific way. And they can't see it any other way because, that's what happens with the team. You're all, you're bringing different ideas together, but you're all working together and not necessarily working with sort of different teams outside of that. So you're kind of...
I think departments is a very old-fashioned way. I think of old corporates and conglomerates that have their finance team, their legal team, their marketing. Right. For me, it's very old-fashioned. What I'd really like to do in an ideal world, and we're too small at the moment to do it, is multidiscipline teams where perhaps you've got a team that focus just on product. And within that team, you've got a developer, you've got a product manager, you've got someone from marketing, and they all sit together rather than all the devs sitting in one place. And it's back to that flowing of ideas and people not being siloed, seeing, I hate the expression, the bigger picture. I think the real successful businesses, and that's what they're starting to do now, is have these multidiscipline clusters within a business rather than big departments.
Absolutely. What advice would you give to people who would like to sort of either become self-employed or just generally start their own businesses?
I think, I think it's really important to start to understand what success looks like for you. So where do you want to get to? Because I think that looks different for different people. So if you want a side project or a weekend project where actually success for you means having a sense of purpose or something you enjoy, or playing to your creative side, maybe you're an artist and you want to have your own sort of project on the weekends that maybe you pay for your materials out of it, or you just do it for pleasure, or is it going to be a business where effectively you want it to become the revenue stream for your life? Is it going to pay the bills? And I think understanding what that business is going to be to you, I think is the key thing. I always say as well, don't give up everything until you're in a comfortable position. I'd never suggest giving up a full-time job to go and start something unless you have got a huge amount of savings that you're sitting on and you can afford to work through. Because as we said earlier, most businesses fail. It might take you 6 months, a year, 2 years to get it off the ground. So I think that's important. Understand what you want to get out of the business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I remember one time I left a particular organization because of a sort of like a toxic work environment, and I was frustrated with different elements to it. But problem was I left and I didn't have something set up afterwards. And it was a very weird situation because on one hand, I felt like it was absolutely the right decision just in general for my well-being to not be in that environment anymore. But at the same time, it took me a month to find another job. So it wasn't sort of a smart business decision. So I think that like you do have to think ahead. You have to have like a rough plan. Things change, plans change, but at least you've got like a rough setup of, you know, this is what the next 6 months will look like. This is what the next 12 months will look like. You have to have that.
And I think you do need to be disciplined as well. I think you need, you know, sit down, plan it out. You know, as they say, plan goes out the window the first moment that it encounters the enemy. You know, that it's entirely true. But at least the act of sitting down, planning it out, thinking about things, you know, talk it through with your partner, your friends, family, whoever. You know, it may well be they go, "You're barking, don't do it," and it may well be that you go, "I'm going to do it anyway."
Yeah.
Again, they will have forced you to think about some of these things.
Yeah.
You know, I've always said, you know, what do they say? Fail quickly, fail cheaply. So find a way in which you can test whether or not your business idea works quickly. So, you know, within software, we talk about the minimum viable product. So something that you can build, which is a really basic version of your product that you can ship quickly, get some feedback on, so that you can at least get an idea of whether or not there's a demand for it and whether or not it works. You know, there's nothing worse, and it's the same with established customer businesses. You know, you could spend a year working on a feature, ship it, and you realize that it's not what your customers wanted. You know, which is why we don't build like that anymore. You know, you need to be doing stuff in small little increments where you can keep shipping quickly, getting feedback, and making this constant change. You know, it's all about evolution rather than revolution.
Couldn't agree more. What's the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
Gosh. You know, look, I think it keeps coming back to it. You just got to keep going. I think you do. You know, and I think, look, I think there's no doubt about it. In order to keep going, you need a good support network. So good friends, good partner, good colleagues. I think if you're starting a business, it's good to have people around you within the business that you know and trust. So many CEOs I've spoken to that have started businesses, you know, talk about, you know, the lonely furrow of sort of, you know, head down, no one else they can really talk to or understand, and that's pretty common. You know, and in the early days that can be tough. So a good support network. You do have to find ways of getting out of your head and relaxing. So find something you enjoy, you know, whether it's art, music, you know, as I said, I love running, anything that can allow you to just recharge and come back ready for the next day.
I'll add to that as well. It's funny how things that are so far removed from your daily work life can really help in terms of, you know, problem solving and stuff. Like the amount of times I've just gone for a walk and, you know, I like to just sort of listen to music and go in nature and stuff. And I'll just be standing there, like appreciating it. And then boom, there comes the idea, the answer that I was looking for, or just, I don't know, some inspiration or whatever. And I think it's that disconnect that helps you, you know, find the answers afterwards. Because if you do try to just sit there and focus intently on the idea, I just don't think it's as effective, and you won't necessarily always get there. It's much better to just take that time for yourself and, you know, rest and recover, recharge, and then you'll probably find what you're looking for.
Absolutely. It's that ability to step back, isn't it? And to, you know, stepping back from the laptop is one of the best things you can always do. Sorry, my dog's just appeared.
Lovely.
one of the benefits of being at home in lockdown. But yeah, absolutely, just the ability to step back. You know, I think one of the things, particularly with, you know, modern technology, is I think we quite often feel that we need to reply straight away. And that's one of the worst things that we can do. So stepping back, going for that walk, just it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. As we draw things to a close for today, I just want to ask you, do you have any major upcoming projects that you'd like to share with us, or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're really trying to focus on this year, and I talked about it earlier really, which it's back to this idea of it's not just about building software anymore. So one of the things we're really trying to focus on is how we build legacy at Statuscake. How can we help the wider community? So one of the projects we're working on is we're trying to work with a charity in London called the 999 Club, who work with the homeless.
Excellent.
And working with them, trying to get into some schools as well. We're trying to understand how some of the kids in London boroughs that are, really some of the most deprived areas in the country, how we can move them through into STEM, so science, technology, and so on. What is it that is not giving them the opportunity? And we're going to try and work with some schools to find out what the issues are. But we're also going to work with some of the colleges to try and find some apprentices that we can bring on board and start, giving some of these kids the opportunity that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise get. I think COVID has been really bad for increasing that inequality gap. We talk about the digitally poor. If you think about a lot of the children,
right, okay, yeah,
access to laptops or a mobile device. It really has been a struggle for a lot of these schools over the last year. So for us, a big effort this year. And what I love is it's not about the product really, it's about what we can do with the wider community. So that is our big thing for this year, trying to get some apprentices and trying to, help a few people.
Oh, excellent. I think it's wonderful that you're doing that work. I mean, I've heard on various news reports around here in Manchester, where I'm living, that some schools have been providing, things like laptops and equipment to students. But obviously, if you think about that on a mass scale, like how many families are out there that don't necessarily have access to these things, it's very difficult for schools to be able to provide all those resources. So I think it's fantastic that an organization such as yours is actually doing things to sort of help with that and help the disadvantaged in society. I think that's fantastic.
It's the talent of the future.
Yeah.
We know the workplace is going to be changing in the future. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But some of these schools, they've got 2 laptops in the whole school. So there's a big piece of work to do there. But yeah, really looking forward to getting stuck into that. And it's different. I enjoy it. You were talking about how you like this wide variety of things within your life. Well, for me, I've got that. We've got the product, we've got marketing, and now we've got this initiative as well. So it keeps my life varied and exciting.
Excellent. Well, I want to say a massive thank you for agreeing to be on the show, James. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you and getting to know more about your company and yourself as a businessman. I want to wish you the best of luck in the future. And just to say a massive thank you.
My absolute pleasure, and stay safe.
I will do. And for everyone listening to the Christian Reeve podcast, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you would like to see a specific guest in the future, please let me know. If there's a particular topic you would like to hear on the Christian Reeve podcast, please let me know. If you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, leave us a review, leave us your comments, your feedback. Let me know what you think. And as always, be safe, be well. I'll see you in the next one.